Hello, my name is Snowlight. This is my Warcraft University, a YouTube series intended to give new and mid-tier players simple concepts towards playing World of Warcraft at a higher level. In this video, we will discuss DPS Fundamentals. At its core, the DPS role can be simplified to a single concept. Use your abilities, and you will do a good amount of damage. Occasionally, you will hear people joke about rolling your face on the keyboard and doing maximum amounts of damage. There is instant gratification in using an ability and immediately seeing an enemy's health go down, which I believe is one of the primary reasons that DPS is the most popular and common role in World of Warcraft. That being said, there are a number of concepts and key terms that are core to the DPS role, where understanding these concepts will help to take your game to the next level. In the past, as we have discussed the user interface, you may have noticed that I have more or less neglected to discuss this rectangular bar graph near the bottom left of my screen. This real-time chart is an add-on called Skada damage meters, and there are other similar add-ons out there that you can use if this one doesn't fit your style, like Recount and Ministats. The DPS role is very much evaluated on how much damage you can put out, so by using these DPS meters, I can evaluate my own damage output, as well as others in my group. If you are a DPS player, you will want to push yourself to hit the biggest numbers you can reach on your own damage meters. As a side note, please do not treat people poorly based on their own performance on the damage meters. We want to foster positive relationships in our communities. So now that we have a way to evaluate our skills as a DPS player, how can we improve our skills so that we can move up on the meters? Let's take a look at some of the foundational concepts to being a good DPS. Alright, it's time for an easy quiz. How much damage do you do while you are dead? 0. You deal 0 damage while you are dead. That's right, even if you had applied dots or other similar damage up on the bad guys, that counts towards damage that was dealt before you died. So when your body hits the floor, so does your ability to deal more damage. Based on that, it is natural to say you will always be able to put out more damage while you are alive than when you are dead. If you do die, the best thing you can do to improve is to ask yourself questions like, what hit me? Why did it hit me? Could I have done something to avoid taking that damage? And based on these questions, finding ways to stay alive the next time you face the same boss. We will spend many videos in the future on the topic of staying alive, so for now, try to find ways to stay alive, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you just don't understand what killed you. We touched briefly on spec rotation in the previous video. In order to raise your DPS to the next level, you need to know your ability rotation so that you can press the right buttons in the right order. In many cases, your optimal rotation will be affected by the talents you choose, so it can seem overwhelming on first glance at an online guide. As always, I recommend the guides on Icy Veins, but it is also foundational to increasing your DPS potential and output. There are also variations for single target rotation and multi-target rotations, and as a beginner, I recommend you start with focusing on how high you can get your single target DPS, and then at a later time circle back for multi-target rotations. For most DPS classes, you will have some big cooldown abilities that make you do more damage for a certain amount of time. In many cases, a few abilities can be chained together, activated at the same time, to further increase your DPS for a few moments, and create something of a damage spike for around 30 to 60 seconds. If possible, you want to line this up with any time a boss will take increased damage, called a burn phase, and to do this will take some understanding of boss mechanics, which we will discuss in a future lesson. Otherwise, you want to use these as often as possible in order to raise your DPS output. For shorter fights and non-raid bosses, you will generally want to use your big cooldown abilities within a few seconds of the fight starting. It is normal during a raid boss for a player's output over time to have spikes and then return to normal a few times throughout the fight. If you're doing everything right, your damage output should look something like this. Once you know which abilities you're going to use and which order you intend to use them in, the next step is to put these abilities in a place where they can be easily pressed without much thought while you are in a high-pressure boss fight. That is to say, your mind should be focusing primarily on staying alive and not thinking about where did I put that ability again. To that end, you will want to spend some time making sure all of your abilities are where you remember them during an encounter. You can expand this concept further into updating your key bindings, the keyboard keys that activate the abilities on your bars, or further into macros, custom commands that can do multiple things at once, but these more advanced concepts start with the premise of knowing your abilities and putting them somewhere you are comfortable with. So we will start from that premise as well. Alright, now we're going to touch briefly on one of my biggest pet peeves. Most people like to say, practice makes perfect. But I consider this to be completely incorrect. If you practice bad habits, then you will perform bad habits. If you practice good habits, you will perform good habits. To that end, your goal before even starting to raid should be to practice perfection, especially around your rotation and damage spikes. By practicing perfection, you may not have a perfect DPS performance, but you will have much better results than if you practice bad habits, or had not practiced at all. To help with practicing your rotation, there are training dummies in most major cities throughout Azeroth, where you can focus on practicing your rotation without worrying about dying. This is also a great chance to review the previous steps, for example where you put the buttons on your bars, and continue moving them around until you find what is most comfortable for you to perform your rotation as best you can. And from now on, let's throw out the idea that any old practice will result in perfection, and instead say, perfect practice makes perfect. If you take away nothing else from this series, this one concept will make you a better player, and likely will help you in other areas of your life too. No actors start their career on the big screen. Nobody learns to drive in a Formula One vehicle. You don't become an Iron Chef without first proving yourself. Similarly, in Warcraft, you don't become a top-tier raider without first proving yourself in dungeons. Now that there are different levels of dungeons, including normal, heroic, and multiple tiers of mythic difficulty, this will prove to be an excellent method to take your practice with a training dummy and combine it with step 1 of this list, practicing staying alive. The mechanics in dungeons are often not as punishing as in raids, so it will give you a way to transition from a non-threatening target dummy to a semi-threatening encounter without going straight up to extreme threat levels. Remember to stay alive first, and then perform the rotation you practiced afterwards. In addition to the preparation steps mentioned earlier in this lesson, There are a number of static elements that can be selected which will help either your DPS output or your survivability. Improving your gear is one of these elements, and we discussed this in a previous lesson. In addition, selecting optimal gems and enchants will help. Through the rest of Shadowlands, the conduits from your Covenant soulbinds make up another small factor for potential DPS or survivability improvements. Even the choice of Covenant can make a small difference, but for newer players I recommend sticking with whichever Covenant you find the most enjoyable thematically. If you want to take your game to a top tier level, spend some time on Icy Veins to review these elements to the game. Concerning consumables, these also can provide you a DPS boost, but if you are still learning your class, then hold off on these until your DPS starts to approach your maximum possible, since you generally have to purchase those for gold, and that can get expensive quickly. With all of these recommendations, you should now have a solid foundation for taking your DPS game to the next level. If you found this useful, please leave a like on the video or a comment with any questions or ideas so we can continue to work on this series. The subscribe button and the bell are there so you can see when new videos come out, if that is your desire. As always, please be positive in your guilds and help make WoW a fun place for everyone to play. Goodbye for now.